The topic of this video is going to be something really familiar to most, if not all of you former Seventh-day Adventists. So I'm really doing this video for the Adventist who is quietly and secretly searching and discovering Adventism and Ellen White online and not telling anybody and doesn't know about this topic as much. So really that's who this video is for. So let's get to the point. Here's what Ellen White did. Ellen White claimed in a vision in 1850, and you're going to see 4 accounts of that vision. In that vision in 1850, she claims God is the one who created the 1843 Millerite chart. God is the one who put the calculations in that chart. God is the one who said, that really didn't work out so well, so let me put my hand over my false prophecies and miscalculations. That's the God of Ellen White. That's what she said about the true God of the universe in a vision. Well, I'm going to say that she is not describing the true God of the universe in a vision. She received a vision, undoubtedly, from one of the Satan's emissaries masquerading as an angel of light. So this so-called vision of Ellen White first appears in the Present Truth magazine in November of 1850. Then from there we're going to look at Life Sketches in 1851, and we are going to then jump to a book I tend to use almost as much as Great Controversy, Early Writings, 1882, original edition. And then we're going to look at another book, which I use also very frequently, which is a fantastic book, Letters and Manuscripts, copyrighted in 2014. Now, for you former Adventists who already know this topic, I think I may have 2 or 3 little nuggets for you that you may not have discovered, knew about this so-called God hiding his own false prophecy vision. So let's read the words of this false prophet starting here. Here is the first occurrence that I found, and I believe what the Letters and Manuscript cites as the first occurrence, Present Truth, November 1850. I'm going to look at 2 pages because there's 2 things I want you to pay attention to. First, we're going to look first on page 86. I want you to see when this prophecy was given. It says September 23rd. Now this is the November 1850 issue. It is September 23rd, 1850 when this prophecy was given. I want to say that again. September 23rd, 1850. And that's what this magazine is telling us. Now, let's look at the actual vision itself. On page 87 it says this. The Lord showed me. Who showed her? The Lord. That the 1843 chart was directed by his hand. No part of it should be altered. And that the figures were as he wanted them. That his hand was over and hid a mistake in some figures. The chart, the 1843 chart was directed by God, should never be changed. The figures in that chart, the false prophecies, were exactly what he wanted them, and then when they didn't pan out, God hit them with his own hand. Let's move on to the sketches, a sketch of the Christian experience of Ellen White, 1851. You can see we're going to look here on page 61, and I want to make the note again. Look at the top under the gathering time. The date of this prophecy is September. Now this is an 1851 book. So we already know from the November 1850 Present Truth that it's September of 1850. So we know that this date here is consistent from what you just saw in the previous source. Anyway, let's look at the bottom. I've seen that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of God. It should not be altered. Figures were as he wanted them. Pretty consistent message. We're going to move on to Early Writings. We're going to look at 2 pages, 63, 64. Remember, I've said this before in many videos, I am using the original work. If you are using a PDF file, the page numberings will be different. The White Estate did not keep the original page numberings of this original book, but changed them. So I'm using the original book. There are 2 or 3 page 63s and 64s in the original book. So page 63, the gathering time. And this prophecy was given when? There's that date again, September 23rd. Remember that. So let's look at the actual prophecy itself. So we're going to look here on the top of page 64. You see with the red box. Let's move on to the words, which are, I have seen that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord. God owns it, and that it shouldn't be altered, and that the figures were as he wanted them, and that his hand was over and hid a mistake in the figures. So God made the figures. God covered up his own mistake. It's God's chart. Don't change God's chart. Okay, now, here's where it gets interesting, especially for you formers that I may have some nuggets for you, like I said, that you don't know about. This book is just proving to be a gem of a book. So we're going to look at this book now. And I got 2 points to make in this book. So let's look here at the cover. Very same book I held up, copyrighted in 2014, and then it goes on to say, and we're going to look at these 2 pages, 242 and 243. We are first going to look at page 242. And you can see, when was this vision given? It says October of 1850. Wait a second. We just saw in the Present Truth, it was dated September. So we know it's September of 1850. And then that same September date shows up in early writings and life sketches. But here in this book, they say a vision given on October 23rd. And it's hard to see, but I underlined it. The first sentence of this vision says, a vision the Lord gave me October 23rd, 1850. So look with me here for a second. You just saw 3 accounts where this vision is September of 1850. But now we have this book in 2014 that's telling us, well, never mind all of that. It's really October of 1850. Adventists can't even get the dates of the visions of their so-called prophet right. What else do they get wrong in their so-called visions? You know, you would think that as time progresses, we would learn more. I mean, we do in the Bible. Archaeology yields more evidence and more accuracy to what the Word of God says. Only it seems like as we discover more about Ellen White, we understand more confusion, because now the date of it is changed. By the way, this is a good time for me to say this. I read all the time in Adventist literature. Ellen White was a inspired, whatever you want to call her, Adventists call her many different names, who had over 2,000 visions. You know what I'm going to say? No, she didn't. I will only agree with you, Adventist, and her visions when you give me a list of the 2,000 plus visions that she had and the publications that they appear in, or I can go in and read all of them. You should be asking the same question. I found an answer on the White estate, by the way, where that 2,000 number came from. It came from Arthur White, who went back and said he counted them, but nobody has a list of these visions. Dates, places, publications. So until I see them, it's fantasy. Adventists are just making it up, because we don't have 2,000 visions of Ellen White. Let's go back to the book here. So here you go. This vision is September of 1850. It is not October of 1850. Adventists can't even get this right. But let's move on and let's look at this vision in this book on page 243. And then it says, I saw the old chart was directed by the Lord, and that not a peg of it should be altered without inspiration. Stop there for a minute. You just read this same vision in 3 other pieces of literature, and in none of them were those words without inspiration after the word altered. None. It first appears here in this book. So not only do we have the vision date wrong, we have the vision will be altered without inspiration. Because the previous one said, don't alter the chart. Now it's, well, you can alter it if you got the right inspiration. But inspiration by who? God? Ellen White? Her angel of light? I mean, I don't know. Now we're adding words to Ellen White. Let's go back to the page here. I'll start again. I saw that the old chart was directed by the Lord, and not a peg of it should be altered without inspiration. I saw the figures on the chart were as God wanted them. He wanted his false prophecy. Here, for your review again, look behind the word altered in each of the 3 cases above the last one. And those words without inspiration are not there. Somebody added those words at some point in time, because they weren't there in 1850, 1851, or 1882, but we sure found them in 2014. By the way, in the 3 above it, we know this so-called vision was in September of 1850. But now Letters and Manuscript says it's October of 1850. Adventists just can't get anything right. Which vision is true? Who knows? Let's look at that 1843 chart. There it is. Here's God's chart with God's false calculations, with God's false prophecy that God needs to hide with his hand. And hide with his hand, apparently he did. There he is putting his hand over the 1843 date saying, don't look here. Can't see my false prophecy. Remember what Ellen White said? This is God's chart, which makes it God's false prophecy. Because God can't calculate prophetic dates very well. And can you change the chart? I don't know. So this God of Ellen White is an absolute grand deceiver who makes a chart with false calculations on it. They don't work out, and he puts his hand over it and hides it. It doesn't get any more brazen and heretical than accusing the God of the universe of creating and hiding a false prophecy. If you are a Seventh-day Adventist and this doesn't bother you, that Ellen White, your so-called inspired, whatever you want to call her, she's God inspired is what it says. She's inspired by God. And if that doesn't bother you, that she says those words about the God of the universe, there's no hope for you. None. But if it does bother you, and I hope it does, and it should, then you ought to start questioning Adventism, because Adventism is not true. I can already tell you that. It is not true. Just this one vision by Ellen White here proves Adventism is not true, and Ellen White is not inspired in any way for her accusatory words of the God of the universe. Ellen White insults the God of the universe when she does this. Perhaps she should have read the book of Numbers, which says this: God is not a man that he should lie. But Ellen White's God does lie. Ellen White's God creates deception and then hides it with his hand. Okay, but it gets worse. Recall that this September 1850 prophecy, now October, September said this chart created should not be altered. Let's look again at present truth, remind ourselves. Here's what it says, purple text, no part of it should be altered. Well, now we got to ask, what do Seventh-day Adventists do? We're going to let them tell us about this 1843 chart in this July 5th, 1984 Advent Review magazine. We're going to look on page 11. We're going to look at this red box blown up on screen in front of us, and it says this: the Millerite chart was replaced a few years later by one that included the three angels of Revelation 14. The energetic Samuel W. Rhodes of Oswego, New York, showed James and Ellen White his newly designed prophetic chart in August of 1850. Let's look at that chart. Here is the August of 1850 revised Millerite chart. What was Ellen's vision again in September of 1850 from God? God said, don't change it in September. But what did Ellen and James do the month prior? They changed the chart anyway. Ellen White's God said, don't change the chart in September of 1850, when Ellen White changed it in August of 1850. And it's only in this book that we see the charts not to be altered without inspiration. It first shows up in 2014. Well, Ellen missed that date then. Are these the actions of a true prophet? Are the words that we read, supposedly from this vision, the words of a true God? The answer to both is no. It is not a true prophet, and it is not the God of the universe. It's some God, but it's not the true God. The Adventist God is a deceiver who creates false prophecies and hides his mistake. While the prophet of Adventism ignores her God and makes the changes anyway. You know, this whole thing, as I'm putting this together, reminded me of another God. And he's the God of Islam. And he's often called Allah by the Muslims. And he also is a deceiver. And I'm going to show you excerpts. Here's one of many. I got over 55 unique English translations of the Quran. So I just picked this one here by Muhammad Assad, who, if my memory serves me correct, he was a Jewish convert to Islam, which is interesting in amongst itself. So what does this God of Islam say? And let's look here. We're going to look at this Quran. As you can see here, the very one I just held up, copyrighted in 1980. And we're going to look at a surah, a verse, Surah 3, Al-Imran. 354 says what? Read with me here. And the unbelievers schemed. These are the Jews, by the way. The Jews, in other words, you can say, schemed against Jesus, but God brought their scheming to naught. For God is above all schemers. So pause with me here. Here's what I want you to know. I love that verse when I go to mosques or when I witness to Muslims. Because when I have a Quran that has the Arabic in it, like this one does, I know what that word you just read, schemers, means in Arabic. In Arabic it's called makara, often called makarin. And makara or makarin in Arabic means deceitful, liar. Most English translations, and the English translators know this. So when you pick up an English translation of the Quran at Surah 354, most likely you're going to see God is the best of all planners. They tone down the word. The word in Arabic means deceiver. The God of Muhammad, the God of Allah, is the greatest of all deceivers, as Surah 354 says. So When I go to a mosque and I witness to Muslims and they tell me how to become a Muslim, I say, why do I want to be a Muslim? Your God is the greatest of all deceivers. I don't want to be part of that. And they say, no, our God is not the greatest of all deceivers. I go, hey, I just happen to have a Quran here with me. Let's look at Surah 354. You read Arabic? And probably 90% of the time they do. I go, translate Makara for me in English. They know exactly at that point that the English translation for planners has toned down the word because the word is deceiver. God is the biggest deceiver. I can't help but think about Ellen White and her deceiver God and Muhammad and his deceiver God. Now let's look at an actual lexicon here. Here's the Arabic English Dictionary by Hans Veer, 4th edition. There's makara at the top. Makara is deceive, delude, cheat. Let's look at another one here. Here's an online source. You know what? Lexicons are just as dangerous to Muslims as they are to Adventists. When we examine the original language and use the original words, it refutes their religion. It does with Adventists all the time. It does the same thing with Muslims. You can see I got the arrow pointing to the very surah verse we just looked at, 354. And makara means what? Practice deceit, guile. So once again, Surah 354 says, Allah is the greatest of all deceivers. And what does Ellen White say about her God? He's a deceiver too. All Ellen White shows, to me anyway, us is the God of Adventism is a liar in the creation of his 1843 chart and a deceiver. The God of Islam and Muhammad is likewise a deceiver. The inspired source behind Adventism, here's an original 100th anniversary of the Review and Herald magazine. This is 1949, celebrating 100 years of the Review and Herald with Ellen White. Here's a Quran. Both of these here, both of the prophets here, Ellen White and Muhammad, same source. And that source is the greatest deceiver of all time. That source is the greatest deceiver, as Surah 354 says. And that source is the greatest deceiver who creates his own false prophecy and his own fake chart with wrong calculations and puts his hand over it and hides it. And then it comes from a religion who doesn't even know when the original vision was given. Is it September or is it October? And then why did you add the words here without inspiration behind the word altered when it doesn't appear in any of the other original sources? No, both sources are the same. Whether it's Ellen White or Muhammad, it's the same God. But you know what Jesus says about Satan and deception? Look with me here at John 8:44. 8:44 says, you are of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is the liar and the father of lies. Because you know what? There's nothing new under the sun. What has been is what will be. And what has been done is what will be done. There's nothing new under the sun. Calling God a deceiver, whether in the 1800s or 1200 years earlier with Muhammad, it's the same thing. Verse 10. Is there a thing of which is said, see, this is new. It's already been in ages before us. No. Nothing Ellen White said is new in her 1850 vision because Muhammad said it basically 1200 years before her. Verse 11. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of latter things, yet to be among those who come after. Nothing new under the sun. Lastly, here's Muhammad. Here's Ellen White, both talking to their inspired angels about 1200 years apart. And it just so happened that these angels and this God represented through these angels is the same. Muhammad's God is the greatest deceiver of all time. Ellen's God is a deceiver who can't even calculate false prophecies and has to hide them with his hand. And no wonder, as it says here in 2 Corinthians 11:14, and no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Muhammad and Ellen White, both talking to satanic angels disguised as angel of light. If you're an Adventist, this should trouble you to your soul, and it's time to rethink Adventism and get out of this false religion.